Well, hello everyone, and welcome to the podcast. I am absolutely thrilled that you are here. My name is Billy Dees, and if you've never checked out our program before, we are primarily an interview and a commentary podcast. This particular episode is going to be a little bit of both. With me on the studio line is Penny, otherwise known as, Nurse Penny.
Hospice Nurse Penny.
Hospice Nurse Penny on a TikTok. Thank you very much for being with us today.
Thank you for having me on.
Oh, certainly. And I would strongly advise checking her out on TikTok. Boy, man, it was just an absolute mountain of followers. You're in the hundreds of thousands now, on your way to 500,000. And she specializes in the fighting the stigma, I guess is a good way of put it, around hospice. And I never really realized that there was a stigma around it until I had to go through it with my mother. I had somebody make a remark at the funeral, you gave up on her. And, that's the kind of thing that I don't know what they expected me to do. She was 90 years old. Everything was shutting down. None of her body was functioning properly. I don't know if they expected me to transplant her head or what. But anyway, yes, it's a common thing. People have a fear of it, and that's something that we've talked about before. Penny has been on the program. It's something we might revisit. But anyway, hospice people, let me tell you, they have helped many families through some very difficult times. And I'll tell you that in my experience here in Ohio, my experience with the hospice people was absolutely fantastic. Anyway, what we're going to talk about today, this is interesting. We're going to talk about a nurse who made a mistake giving medication, and it resulted in a fatality. And I'm going to give you just some of the cliff notes on this. This nurse was criminally prosecuted for a fatal drug error in 2017. RaDonda Vaught was convicted of gross neglect of an impaired adult and negligent homicide on March 25th, 2022, after a 3-day trial in Nashville, Tennessee. Vaught is scheduled to be sentenced May 13th, and she faces 3 to 6 years in prison for neglect and 1 to 2 years for negligent homicide. Vaught was arrested in 2019 and charged with reckless homicide and gross neglect of an impaired adult in connection with the killing of Charlene Murphey, who died at Vanderbilt University Medical Center in late December 2017. The neglect charge stemmed from allegations that Vaught did not properly monitor Murphy after she was injected with the wrong drug. Medical errors are generally handled by professional licensing boards or civil courts. Criminal prosecutions like Vaught's are very rare, don't happen very often. This trial has been closely monitored by nurses and medical professionals across the United States. There is a strong concern by the medical community that this conviction could set a precedent for criminalizing medical mistakes. Okay. Let's talk a little bit. Let's start with what no one questions. And that was a horrible tragedy, a terrible mistake. Okay.
Absolutely. Yes.
From what I understand, her detractors, her critics, say that she overrode a couple different layers of protections. There was some sort of an alert that you go through when you're taking the instructions from the computer and are about to administer the drug. And there was also a warning on the bottle that it was a paralytic. Now that's the way I understand it. So I'm not as knowledgeable as you are. Tell me a little bit about what happened here.
So the override function on a med dispensing machine allows for a nurse to pull a medication that has not been added to the patient's profile. So basically they can put the patient's name in and they can pull a drug for that patient that has not been ordered by the physician for the patient. And it's frequently used in a number of different circumstances when a patient needs to have a medication in a fairly quickly um, manner,
Hmm.
and it's not yet available for them, and so they do the override feature on that. As far as missing the label on the medication, my understanding was she was distracted. She had an orientee with her. She just did not look at the vial, and that right there, is definitely um, a mistake that she should not have made.
Yes. I'm here again being a layman. I know from my limited knowledge, it seems to me like stuff like this, it's amazing that it doesn't happen more often. I've been in the hospital a number of different times visiting people. I've been in the emergency room when it was busy. I had a real bad case of kidney stones one time, and there were some gang violence and some other things happening. And then there's people just running around all over the place. I can't imagine it's amazing to me that it doesn't happen more often. What's your take on that? Did you feel that the system has enough safeguards in place that this is? What's your take on that?
No, no, and so here's the thing: medications happen on a medication errors happen on a regular basis. They happen very, very frequently. It's one of the most common things to happen in healthcare is a medication error. I always say if you're a nurse and you've never had a med error, you've never passed a med.
Hmm.
It's very common. Now, for the person to die from a med error, that's probably less common, but that can happen as well.
Hmm.
So it is something that can happen, and there's a lot going on, for nurses. It's not just a matter of pulling a med and having all the time in the world to be able to go in and give the medication. Nurses are really busy, and
Yeah.
they've become busier and busier, especially through the pandemic with staffing shortages. We are actually now rushing nurses through nursing school. We're putting them into unsafe positions too early in their training. We're not really
Hmm.
giving them good training. We're kind of throwing them out there and saying you need to do this, you need to do this safely, and there's just not enough safeguards in place for them to be able to do their job effectively and safely. And staffing is a big part of that.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I was going to say, I here again as a layman observing this, it's amazing to me that through the pandemic, there's been a little evolution. And nurses were heroes, and then they went to people who don't deserve to work. They deserve to be fired because they didn't, get the vaccine, and now they're being criminally prosecuted. So that's quite the evolution in 2 years. And I understand. I was listening to a number of different nurses talk about this, and they brought up just what you did. There's as hospitals and all these other things try to save costs. For example, having a breathing specialist come in. Well, it's just as easy to have the nurses do it.
Hmm.
When it comes to having a phlebotomist come in, well, you know what? Nurses can draw blood. And more things like this are put on their plate. And now there are staffing shortages, as you said. So it's really a recipe for a problem. So I guess my next question is, I've heard different things about how Vanderbilt, and let's start there. Vanderbilt handled this, from what I understand, right out of the gate, not so well. Do you have any information about that?
Yeah, my understanding is that first of all, RaDonda Vaught did the right thing. As soon as she realized that she had made a medication error, she reported herself. She told them what she had done. Vanderbilt did not. They tried to cover it up, and it only became apparent that this had happened through, I think, somebody finding out about it through Medicaid, or I'm not exactly sure of all the details. I just understand that they did not respond to it immediately like they should have. They tried
Okay,
to kind of cover it up. But she self-reported, which is what we want nurses to do. We want them to
yes,
be able to self-report, and that needs to happen in conjunction with a just culture for the
sure,
for the agency or the hospital so that they
yes,
don't face criminal charges.
right. Interesting. A lot of the people that have really been critics of her haven't mentioned the hospital too much. And it seems like the hospital just kind of let her take the heat for this.
Yes,
Okay.
I would say so.
Okay. That seems to be the general impression. Here again, I wasn't there, but that seems to be the general, impression. So, with all of this being said, um, let's say the way the system is supposed to work, even in the best situation, there's going to be accidents, there's going to be problems. And I was going to equate this to plane crashes. Okay, there's the black box on the plane, and we want to go for 100% safety on airplanes, but sometimes that doesn't work out. When there's a crash, sometimes, as horrible as it is for the people involved, a lot of insights are taken from that crash that will prevent many future problems. The way that, for example, there was a number of issues with some planes. The pilots couldn't easily overtake the autopilot, and now they've made that easier and other things. So when they're in a tense situation, they don't have to figure out the status of the autopilot. Just grasping the control firmly will give them control of the plane. Little things like this. So we learn a lot about a bad plane crash. And I would say that when you have a system involved for medications and all kinds of mistakes, that when the community reviews that, when the review boards and all of this look at that, they get insights into how to prevent it from happening again. And let's just say there's human beings involved here. Accidents are going to happen. We want to make sure that they're as few and far between. So, am I correct? Is that analogy correct, that we do, follow mistakes to make sure that they don't happen again?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, that's one of the reasons we want people to self-report their medical errors so that we can do a root cause analysis and try to determine what were the systems and processes that were in place or not in place that
Hmm.
weren't working for us. And as a matter of fact, my current position is I'm a hospice quality manager for a very large hospice agency. And part of my job is to review our safety events, to look at
Mm.
all of our safety events, which include medication errors, and to investigate them and to determine if there was something that could have been preventable, what level of harm it is, and then if it's a significant amount of or significant level of harm and our processes weren't followed or they just broke down, we're going to try to determine what can we do to prevent that from happening again
Okay.
through root
S-
cause analysis, which
Sure.
is what I think Vanderbilt eventually did.
Mm.
And once they did that, they put, I believe, 5 new processes in place to try to prevent this same error from happening,
Okay.
which to me is really telling because
Yeah.
why weren't those in place before
Before.
this mid error happened?
Yes. Yes. And I said the same thing about some of those plane crashes where the pilots couldn't override the autopilot. I mean, I have cruise control in my car, and if I step on the brake, I have control of the car. And they're flying, something going 400 miles an hour with 200 people on it. So anyway, the next question then, being that we have these self-reporting and we have the system in place to correct mistakes, the obvious question then would be, if a nurse or any medical professional is in a situation where someone dies and oops, well, we're going to make sure that doesn't get found out about, because I don't want to go to jail over this. Is it a possibility that with the looming threat of criminal prosecution for a mistake, could situations like this get buried and thereby never get corrected?
I I actually did a TikTok about this. I think that as much as that is a fear that people have, I think that by and large, most nurses are still going to act prudently and report, especially if there is a chance of stopping the harm from happening to the person.
Right.
If they discover the error after someone has died, they might be a little reticent to report it. They
Right.
might think twice about it. And I do think you're going to have nurses that, regardless, if they discover they make a med error, they're not going to self-report
Yeah.
because they're concerned. But I think most nurses, I guess I hope most nurses, and I know for myself, I don't do direct patient care anymore, but I know for myself, if I made a med error, I would still self-report,
Yeah.
especially if there's a chance of harm to that person that can be stopped.
Yeah. I hope this doesn't seem like a dramatic question. I don't mean for it to be. I know that from state to state, it varies on when an autopsy is required. In a lot of states, the rule is, a death that isn't obvious. Let's say somebody's just found dead in their living room, that person gets an autopsy. A lot of times, when it happens under a doctor's care and a doctor signs a death certificate, there is not a follow up with an autopsy that is required. So, if there is, let's say, a death that happens in a hospital that wasn't supposed to happen, how easily can that be hidden? I mean, is that something that the that I'm just being paranoid about, or is that something that is a concern?
I really can't. I'm really not. I don't have the authority to speak to that, but just guessing, my opinion would be that it could be covered up because if a person's in the hospital, they're sick.
Yes.
So it's possible to attribute their death to their sickness, which is what they tried to do with this patient. That's exactly what Vanderbilt did. They said that her death was a result of her brain hemorrhage.
Hmm.
And then later it came out that that wasn't, she had received the medication, and that was, I don't know the whole sequence of events as far as that
Yeah.
happened, but that is what they first tried to do, was to say this was a death of natural causes. So I think it could happen because you're in the hospital because there's something going
Yes.
on, unless it's, you broke your leg.
All right. Yeah.
Clearly you're
Sure.
not going to die from that, but there could
Yeah.
be some circumstances where there could be some kind of, tweaking of the death certificate to make it look like the person did not die from,
Right.
that
Yes.
med error.
I get what you're going, and that like I said, that's all the more reason why I feel the specter of putting people who are in a position, and there might be any number of people that are involved in someone's care, and they all should be able to speak freely, and they all should be able to analyze things that are going on. And here again, this fear of criminality is something that I want to follow up on. Prior to getting on here again, I was listening to a number of videos, from the area that this happened in. Some of the local nurses came out to support RaDonda, and a lot of them were very emotional after the verdict came out. And actually, there was a more serious charge which she did not get convicted on, called reckless homicide. The other two lesser charges, that I went through at the beginning, that is what she was charged with. The a spokesman, I don't know if it was the prosecutor or a spokesman for the prosecutor's office in this case, in the videos that I was going through, um, denied that this was a precedent setting type of case, that this had to do with one individual in particular. And of course, that's the pat answer in this situation. The gut feeling among you and other professionals, is this something that now has the door wide open, not only maybe to nurses, but doctors as well?
Yes, absolutely. And the nurses and doctors, you only have to spend a short period of time on any social media platform right now to see that that is the general consensus among healthcare providers, is that this has set a precedent, and we now have to worry that that we could be charged criminally for an error. So
Mhm.
yes, it's something that people are concerned about. There are nurses who are now saying that they're done. They're not going to
Yeah,
do patient care anymore because they're too afraid that something will happen.
yeah,
And another part of this is nurses who are going to refuse to deliver medication on a stat order that hasn't been, appropriately entered into the Pyxis and isn't available for their patient. They're not going to override anymore. They're not
yeah,
going to take verbal orders anymore. They're going to protect themselves from possible criminal charges.
sure.
So yeah, there is going to be a lot of uh, pushback from the nursing community.
Yeah. I've talked to a couple of different doctors over the years, and one of the contributing factors to the cost of healthcare that a lot of people don't talk about is the malpractice insurance, which is astronomical. Okay. And now you have to factor in the possibility of, criminal defense as part of your practice as well. So I don't know that this is a good thing. You know, mistakes. There's different levels of mistakes. I've often said, if someone in a car accident, let's say, killed a member of my family, could I forgive them? Most of the time, I've been in situations we all have where there's a close call and we have a choice to zig or zag, and just by the grace of God, we make the right decision. And if something like that happened and the person made the wrong decision, that's forgivable. Then when you factor in other things, when you factor in reckless driving, when you factor in impaired driving from drugs and alcohol, now that quote unquote mistake has a different color around it. On the level of mistakes, how high was this one by your estimation for RaDonda?
Well, I mean, her mistake resulted in the death of a human.
Yes.
I don't think it was. I know it wasn't intentional.
Sure.
She definitely was not doing her job like she should have been.
Mm-hmm.
There were some extenuating circumstances that were causing her to be distracted. She had only been a nurse for 2 years,
Okay.
and they took her away from the ICU to be a resource nurse. Usually, resource nurses have a lot more experience than that, and they
Okay.
gave her an orientee. So the level of mistake obviously is very high, but I can't put it on the same level as somebody who chooses to get drunk and get in a car and drive their car and kill somebody, or somebody who's driving recklessly. I put it more along the same lines as what you're talking about. When a person zigs instead of zagging, they cause an accident, they accidentally kill somebody.
Yeah.
It was a terrible mistake. She definitely deserved to lose her license. She should never practice again, and she
Mm-hmm.
won't. But to find her criminally responsible, to me, that it's not appropriate.
Yeah. There's already, you touched on this. There's already a staffing problem throughout most industries, in particular in the medical community, because of the fact that there's so much schooling involved. There's so much experience that you have to have on the job for different levels of accreditation, and a lot of people are deciding there's an easier way to make a living. So that being the case, you had the COVID, which really I feel this is my own personal opinion, but I think the medical community and society as well really backhanded slapped a lot of nurses with, they were heroes when they were fighting COVID, when they weren't sure how bad it was, when they weren't sure how lethal it was. They went in there unprotected in terms of vaccines and so forth, and served their community very well. And then as time goes on and everybody starts to feel a little comfortable with the whole thing and the vaccines come out, then they're being threatened with their job. I felt that was really a backhanded way to treat a lot of medical professionals. And you don't have to comment on that if you don't want to, but that's my opinion. With that being said, now with the specter of criminal charges hanging over their heads, it seems like the obvious thing is that this is not going to encourage people to get involved in the medical marketplace.
True. Yes, I agree with that.
Yeah. So
people are not going to want to go into a field where they can make a mistake and be potentially thrown in prison for it.
Yes, that is quite the statement. You're a very learned person. You've been around a long time. What does the system need? I've heard a lot of stories about bad communication between doctors and nurses for a long time. I've heard a lot of stories about bad communication between shift changes. I've heard a lot of stories about this type of thing. what would be does the system need a better way of monitoring patients and the medications they are getting for a 24-hour prolonged stay, 24 hours a day for a week or whatever it is? What gauge is there for consistency in the treatment of that patient?
Well, I just think in general, safe nurse-patient ratios. We need to have safe nurse-patient ratios. That's what it boils down to.
Mm-hmm.
We need to be able to have the nurses available. They should have had a nurse monitoring that patient, and they didn't. In that department, they did not have one. They sent somebody down from the ICU to do this. She obviously had other patients that she needed to care for, and she was tasked with going to do that. They did not protect the patient by giving her what she needed, which was a nurse that could take the time to be with her. So to me, it always comes down to we are expecting nurses to be everywhere at once, and they
Yes.
can't be. We need more nurses. We need to have, and it's not just like there's a nursing shortage. It's about productivity. It's
Mm-hmm.
about making sure that all the nurses have such and such amount of patients to be able to take care of. And I've seen that even in my own agency in hospice, where we have these productivity standards, where we expect our nurses to be seeing a certain amount of patients per day without factoring in how long does it take to drive to their home to see them? How
Yeah.
about the patient that you have to be with for 2.5, 3 hours because something went sideways and you're dealing with it. So they have like these cut and dry, like this is the productivity rate, and they don't consider in there that there are things that can happen that don't make that work well.
Yes. It's easy, these productivity rates, and I hear a lot of talk about those as well. It's easy when you're sitting in an office on the 17th floor, and you're looking at a bunch of real pretty graph charts, and well, if this nurse here was at 67%, I mean, why can't she be at 80? And a lot of times there's a humanity involved in the medical profession. Okay, it's not like building widgets. There's a humanity involved. Sometimes the way things go, one patient, it will be real easy to treat and you move on to the next one. Then there's other times when that's not the case. And given that, the medical community, hospitals and so forth are really serving humanity as much as they are in a business to make money. I know that can sometimes, the argument can be, well, if they don't make money, they're not going to help anybody. But it's more complicated than that. And what would you, just here again, philosophically speaking, how can hospitals and our medical system better serve humanity and still make a profit?
Well, I think you have to look at how profitable do they need to be,
Yeah.
because we are now also learning about these ridiculously high wages that these CEOs of these
Yes.
hospitals are being paid. And why? Why do they need to make that much
Yeah.
money?
I would totally agree with that.
Healthcare is so expensive. It's ridiculous how expensive it is, and it doesn't need to be. It does not need to be so expensive, but now we see why it is, because you have these CEOs making millions and millions and tens of millions
Oh, sure.
a year, and meanwhile, we're cutting our staffing, and we're expecting nurses to do, more work for less pay. So,
Yes.
it's the almighty dollar is really the issue, is
Yeah.
stop making them something that has to be so profitable.
Yes. We could talk a lot about the money side of healthcare. My own personal view is I'm all for nurses, doctors, people who actually get their hands dirty with blood and God knows what else. These people that are shuffling papers around, and like you said, making more money than you can jump off of without a parachute, telling nurses that they need to be at 90% productivity. There's something wrong there. There's
Yeah.
absolutely something wrong there. And, I understand insurance is a complicated topic as well. We could probably do a whole show about that. But here again, these are people that are shuffling papers around. They're not people who are actually getting their hands dirty. They're not the people that are going to jail for mistakes. They're not the people getting sued for malpractice. And they're not the people who have to go to school till they're 35 years old to be able to do their job.
Right.
So I really think that, people that are doing the work need to make a good living, because they're not going to do it otherwise. Who would want to who would want to subject themselves to that? And you want the best people. Here again, this is where capitalism, it does work in that regard. The best people are going to be attracted to a job. The smartest and the brightest are going to be attracted to a job that pays well.
Right.
Yeah. So I think you and I, philosophically speaking, are on the same page with this. I think we really need to take care of the people who are on the ground level. Do you want to close off with that kind of remark? The boots on the ground, as they say, when it comes to the military, that's the people we want to take care of.
Yeah, definitely. The people that are having to put their I won't say, well, I guess we could say their lives on the line when we're looking at RaDonda Vaught, who now is, faced with going to prison for doing her job not well, but
Yeah.
never probably going. When she went to nursing school, I doubt if she ever thought in her mind that she could end up going to prison
Yeah.
by being a nurse. I'm sure it never crossed her mind, never crossed my mind. I've never thought, wow, I want to be a nurse, but gosh, if I make a mistake, I might end up going to prison. You
Yes.
know, it's something we never think about.
Yeah. And here again, I could do a whole show about this other thing too, but I think that prosecutors anymore really have, or let me put it this way, they might need a little bit more oversight in the courses that in the cases they decide to prosecute. There's a lot of times when fraud cases and other things, if it's not for a large amount of money, they're not even going to bother with it. And then there's other times like this, for example. I don't know what attracted the prosecutor to this. They decided an ice cream shop is selling ice cream that melts too fast. That's negligence. So I really think there has to be some oversight in prosecutors, and the jury system has to be changed too. Those are two things that it seems like, I lit you up there. I'll let you comment on that.
Well, I agree, because what really gets me about this is RaDonda Vaught has lost her nursing license.
Yeah.
She hurt somebody, she killed somebody through doing her job as a nurse. She will never, ever be in a position to harm someone again in that way.
Right.
It doesn't serve any purpose to put her in jail or prison. It serves no purpose whatsoever to do that.
Yeah.
I don't understand how the prosecuting attorney can even justify criminal charges with that kind of an outcome for somebody who's, let's get the people off the street who really are going to continue to harm others, not somebody who has now been, completely stopped from doing anything further that will ever harm another person. It makes no sense to me whatsoever.
Yeah. She's facing a fair amount of jail time here. And quite frankly, this is a little pet peeve of mine too. A lot of men who are domestic violent offenders, they badly injure or kill their wives and don't face this amount of jail time.
Mm-hmm.
So here again, like I said, when you take people who are doing a job that is a necessity, we need nurses. We need firemen. Okay. Here in Ohio, a lot of the paramedics are faced with very difficult situations out on the streets with the opioid epidemic. A lot of times when they revive somebody with Narcan, what have you, the people who get revived aren't so happy.
No.
And at that point they're lucid, and if they say, I don't want to go to the hospital, they don't have to go. And these people are in the trenches trying to help people that don't want to be helped, and it needs to be done. This is vital work. That could be your child out there on those streets fighting addiction with mental health issues and so on. And they're helping people that don't always realize that you are trying to help them. I mean, these are people, and I'm not a religious person, but the phrase fits here. They're doing God's work. And these kind of people are not the type of people that I want first on the list for consideration for criminal charges when things don't go well. They're faced with too many situations.
Right.
And a lot of times too, these lawyers and all that examine what happened here over a period of a month, when the nurse or the paramedic who was in that situation had a split second to make a life or death situation. It's really unfair in that regard. And I kind of think go ahead.
Yeah, no, I agree. I agree. They don't even have any clue what it's like to be in that position. They have no clue what it's like to be doing that kind of work and to be having to make those decisions, in a short amount of time.
Yes.
And to have so many other things on your brain at the same time.
Yes.
I worked in the ER for 3 months, and it was horrific. I hated it. I went home crying every night. I hated it. I had the worst preceptor. It was a eat your young mentality, where I was left in unsafe positions with my patients and rushed from one to another. Go do this, go do that, and your brain can't even catch up with everything that you're being asked to do.
Yes.
So I think about that with RaDonda Vaught. I think about how, the doctor placed this stat order, go give her this medication. We know you have an orientation with you. You got to go down and give the medication. You got, and she had probably so many things on her mind, and she admits to being distracted. She was distracted, and that is how it is. And if you don't do that work, you have no understanding what it's like to be in that position.
Sure. Do you know if the doctor that put her in that situation stepped up to defend her at all?
No, I don't believe he did. I don't even think he testified in court.
Yeah.
But no, from what I've heard, he has not defended her in any way.
I suspected that, but I just wondered if you had any insights that we don't know for sure, evidently, but it doesn't look like anybody stepped up to defend her at all. No. So that's very sad. So anyway, that is the situation, and I'll hear again. She's going to be sentenced on May 13th. I'm curious to find out exactly what they give her. I hope they go light.
Me too.
But
there's a lot of nurses right now, signing a petition and trying to intervene and do something. A lot of nurses who plan on showing up on that day, and we'll see how it goes, because I think the judge gets to determine. I don't know if it's the jury that determines what the sentence should be.
I'm not sure. I would suspect that this is something that the judge would have discretion on, but I could be wrong about that. That's totally a guess on my part. It seems to me this case is so unique, I really can't base it on anything else. So I'm not sure in a case like this, where you have a medical professional that made a mistake that's being charged with a crime. I'm not sure where that sits in terms of how that is determined. So I don't know for sure.
And isn't it interesting that Vanderbilt is saying this is not precedent setting, and yet it really is?
Mm-hmm.
It is a unique case. Any other cases that have been brought, as far as I am aware, any other cases that have been brought against medical professionals that were criminal cases were when the people who were doing the crime had malicious intent.
Yeah. A lot of those
different.
A lot of those people who went around euthanizing people, for example, that was a case where that's clearly murder. Mm-hmm. Okay, when you have somebody going around putting whatever they put in there, cyanide or whatever, but here's a case where a good faith mistake was done, and we can argue about the level of mistake this was, but it was a mistake. And to put somebody on the chopping block for that criminally, I feel, boy, I don't know. Given the state of the way the medical system is right now, there's probably better ways to approach this. Anyway, we've been talking to Penny, and Penny, like I said, where's the best place to find you online? I know you have a mountain of followers on TikTok for the hospice thing, but where's the best place for people to find you on TikTok?
Yeah, I'm at Hospice Nurse Penny on TikTok and Instagram and Facebook.
Okay.
And I'm It's Nurse Penny on Twitter.
Twitter.
It's Nurse Penny, yeah. Don't do a lot on Twitter yet, but TikTok and Instagram are my big platforms.
I understand that. For you, TikTok is, yeah, you definitely want to stick with that. For me anyway, Twitter has been good. I kind of feel it's built for podcasting, and it's also built for topical subjects like this. I mean, this is burning up Twitter. Of course, we had the thing with the Oscars, which I'm not even going to talk about because I don't care about, but that's blowing up right now. But anyway, Penny, thank you very much for being with us and giving your insights on this. It's very much appreciated, and hope you know you're welcome anytime.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. I'm Billy Dees. You can find me on Twitter at Billy Dees. There's also a link tree in the bio of my Twitter account for the other places that you can find me in terms of social media. You can find the Billy Dees podcast pretty much anywhere podcasts are found. We've been on Apple Podcasts and Spotify for an eternity. We have some new friends over at Good Pods. If you haven't had a chance yet, do check out that app. It's a great app for independent creators. And here again, Billy Dees is where that's the name I use on everything. So real easy to find. Thank you very much for listening to our podcast today, and we will talk to you again next week.